Hey everybody, welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. As always, I'm Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And Alex has a fun housing there he can hold up real quick to
I'm
show you
using it as
guys.
an armrest, actually. That's why my arm's out on the side. Yeah, it gives away a bit what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. But today...
Yeah, I got this bad boy out the cupboard.
Yeah, there it is. Look at that.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about medium format underwater, potentially if it's the future of underwater photography, what we think it would give advantages in, where it still probably lacks for most people. And this stemmed actually from a conversation that I had relatively recently with my friend Phil Burkhardt, who everybody probably knows from Nauticam or Rephoto. And we were in there talking about just cameras in general, and he made the point that he doesn't really know where we go from here in terms of camera performance, image quality, all that kind of thing. And
So
one thing...
He's kind of saying that we've kind of hit this plateau kind of since the D850 really of kind of 50 megapixels, good image quality, good high ISO performance, that you're kind of getting the limit of the sensors and the new generations are not reinventing things in terms of image quality.
Yeah, everybody, and this is something I see in a lot of the forums that I peruse as well, is that, you know, the image quality has kind of plateaued and all of the camera companies seem to be going for just how do they make the features of the actual the performance better, which is great. But they've kind of maybe forgotten about the image quality aspect of it. And the thing that immediately came to mind for me when talking with Phil was the next logical step, I think, would be medium format cameras underwater. And I know Nauticam has some housings for them. You just held up an old Hasselblad film housing for medium format film.
This is not the future. Just to be clear.
But the issue, one of the issues is that, you know, they're expensive, although these days a lot of the medium format cameras are significantly less expensive than, you know, the high-end mirrorless cameras. They have, up until relatively recently, have had really, really bad autofocus. And then of course, the lenses are limiting because they don't have a huge arsenal like Nikon or Canon or Sony, but that is slowly changing. But my case was that would be the next logical step, I think, for underwater shooters looking at getting even better image quality than we have now. I have only very briefly used medium format cameras and just on land, but there is definitely a significant difference in terms of the aesthetic you get from a medium format 50 megapixel file versus a full frame 50 megapixel file. And of course, not if you're looking on Instagram or something like that. But if you're actually, you know, in the file, there is a difference there for sure.
Yeah, I can definitely see there being, I can see the appeal of the medium format cameras underwater. But first of all, you know, it gets you into an image quality range that you're not going to get on a 35 millimeter size sensor, which is attractive to some people. I think shooting medium format underwater, the main thing that's sort of drawn people to it down all the years I've been in underwater photography is actually the production of the photographs becomes part of the appeal of the final result. So it isn't just a case of going, oh, this picture's really good. It's actually how that picture was made becomes part of the story and part of the appeal of the image. And, you know, medium format photographers, the fact they've shot medium format underwater has underpinned the theme of a book, the theme of an exhibition. And I would say that that's the main area that it has an appeal, because it gives the pictures a slightly different look, as you were saying, and just the process of creating the pictures with some of the limitations of those systems, I think drives the photography in a certain direction. There's my front door. I need to go. Sorry. Oh, sorry about that. Some prototype strobes that we'll probably talk about in the future on the channel had to go back to their manufacturer. So that was the courier just arriving for that. Back to medium format though. I think that the two things that make medium format less appealing for underwater photography, and I don't think cost is a big issue these days, the way the cameras have gone, is the fact that, first of all, the lens choice is limiting, and then also the problems of a big sensor that you experience underwater. Anyone who's shot Micro Four Thirds or a crop sensor SLR, for example, underwater, will see the areas that they have advantages over full frame shooters. And one of the main ones is the extra depth of field that you get, which actually really helps with wide angle optics. And so going from, say, a full frame camera up to medium format, you take a step worse in that regard. And that can be a big limitation because you're then really starting to have to really close your aperture down to get decent corner sharpness behind dome ports, and you have to shut it down further than you do on a full frame camera. And then that's starting to introduce some diffraction, although the bigger sensor offsets that a little bit, but it might mean that you're having to shoot a higher ISO to compensate for this very closed aperture. In macro terms, the shallow depth of field look of Micro Four Thirds can be very useful for some shots, but as you wind that magnification up, the shallow depth of field of medium format can become more of a limitation. So my experience of shooting medium format is all from shooting it on film, is that yes, it works. Yes, it's perfectly possible. It's still photography. Things work very simply, and actually the cameras are quite easy to get used to. You just need to make that small adjustment because of the format change. But I think the limitations are those photographic ones underwater, and then the lens choices. And the problem I see for me going medium format in anywhere is that there isn't a good medium format fisheye, certainly for the cameras that I'm aware of. And I think the camera that would, and then at the same time, you don't necessarily have, the range of lenses, or perhaps it should be phrased the other way around, is that the lenses that we like to use, such as, say, a Nauticam WACP, that's been designed around a family of relatively small in size zoom lenses that work best behind those things. The problem is that you might be able to find a zoom lens with that same focal range or same field of view range on a medium format camera, but it tends to be a physically much bigger lens and therefore doesn't work so well behind the optic. So although you might theoretically go, oh, there's a zoom lens that's actually the same as my 28 to 60 on my Sony, made for a medium format camera in terms of field of view, actually that lens is likely not to work so well behind the complex optics that we use underwater, just because its physical size tends to get a little bit too big to work well behind them. So those for me are the other things, is that there are inherent issues of going to a larger format, and there are also the fact that the lens situation is not easily solved. They're not well suited for super macro. They're very good for fish portraiture, I have to say. And for wide angle, you are quite limited. Most of them don't have fish eyes, and you can't just go, oh, I'll just use an FCP then, because often the zoom lens you might want to put behind that FCP isn't actually going to work as well behind that as you thought it was. Although that second point, I have no actual experience of testing any of them. That's just my feeling.
So I know that Todd Winter, who will probably not see this, but he's a friend of both of ours, he shot the original Fuji GFX 50 behind with the WCP, because Fuji has, I think it's like a 40 mil prime or something like that works perfectly with it. So there's at least a place to start with regards to shooting it behind some of Nauticam's wet lenses. And I assume the same lens would work with the FCP as well and give you at least very close to a full fisheye. Obviously, the disadvantage there is, at least with that lens, you can't zoom it, so you lose some versatility. For me, as we've discussed a lot on the show, I don't shoot a lot of super macro. I don't shoot a lot of big scenery, so it's mostly big animals and macro stuff. So for me, the limitations of medium format are not as big an issue as they would be for you. So it is something that has tempted me. If I could ever get my hands on a housing, realistically, I would love to try it, especially because a lot of what I shoot are those bigger macro subjects, or things like sharks or the freshwater subjects, which lend themselves really well to either a full fisheye without having a zoom, or the WACP without having a zoom, and then those slow moving macro subjects that you don't need crazy autofocus for. Yeah. So I think I could work around those limitations. I'm sure I would run into ones here and there that would annoy me, but that happens with every camera. But it'd be something I'd love to try at some point, just to see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've never shot digital medium format. Obviously, there's the main route that people are considering is buying one of the good autofocusing, relatively, I think very competitively priced medium format cameras. And I would say prime among those is the Fujifilm GFX 100 series of cameras. I know a lot of studio and portrait photographers use these as well. The autofocus is I would say it's as good as kind of the mid-generation DSLRs. So you're not stepping way back into, you know, prehistoric times. You've got
Yeah.
a very capable camera. And, you know, the autofocusing is more critical on medium format, because one of the things medium format does when you start shooting is it does expose every little flaw in your photographic approach.
Yeah.
That's certainly one of the things I learned using this old thing is, you know, it really taught you to be a very precise photographer. Not only because you only had 12 shots in this, if I only had the 12 back on it, but also the fact that you really knew if you didn't nail something, it was, you know, clear for everyone to see. So yeah, sorry, Matt.
I think part of that is what's appealing too, is like you have to sort of, and we craft your picture, because there's a lot more thought and a lot more delicate might not be the right word, but there's a lot, you have to be much more delicate with what you're doing to make sure that you don't highlight any of those flaws, and that you really maximize what those big sensors are giving you. And it's not, you know, it's not impossible. I think it'd be harder underwater, obviously, than topside, just because it's not as static an environment. But there'd be ways to work around that as well. And if, like you said, if you're a good diver and you have good photographic technique, I think it'd be much less of an issue.
Yeah, it's something that, you know, every 6 months or so, I definitely dream about. I think, but for me, I would never go to medium. I've shot enough medium format underwater to know some of the limitations, and I know the sensor size of a GFX isn't as big as the 6x6 on here, 6 centimeters by 6 centimeters on here, but at the same time, so it's not as unforgiving as this, and it's not as problematic as this, because medium format isn't one size, it's just bigger than 35 mil. But for me, I dream about it very much as a second camera system, as a chance when the situations are right to use the strengths of the system to create different images to diversify your portfolio. And I think in that situation, it would be excellent. Thinking, you know, the diving I've done this year, I would definitely, I'm just, you know, when this comes out, I'll be in Lembeh. And, you know, in Lembeh, I think it would be a fantastic place to shoot this camera. I think in Canada, there would have been certain dives where it, again, would have been fantastic to use a medium format camera. I think earlier in the summer, when I went to the Bahamas and did Tiger Beach, that would also be a great destination for a medium format camera, just to get really different feeling and looking images of those subjects. And with the, you know, repeatability of subject matter on a trip like that, again, you know, any lack of performance of the camera would be easily hidden by the fact that the subject matter is so easy. So I can see it really working well, but in a specific role rather than as my main camera.
I think this is again where you and I would differ, because most of the diving I do is here locally, and I think it would be a fantastic rig to shoot around Florida. And then most of the places I travel to, I'm not traveling to, you know, the Red Sea with big reef scenes or Raja or anything like that. I go after, you know, wherever there's weird fish, and weird fish can be shot with almost any system. So it is something that has very much tempted me. The issue is the housing prices at this point, but, you know, then maybe they'll come down eventually, or I'll find a used one. But I think, yeah, for, you know, quote unquote working photographer the way you are, I think it would make sense to be a second rig, not a primary one.
Did Nauticam charge more for their medium format housings then?
So the only one they have, I think, is for the GFX 100, whatever number they're on, and it's considerably more expensive than their full frame ones. I probably just because who's ever buying those are, you know, studios.
Yeah, it's probably more that they're custom made, aren't they? You order one and they're like, right, let's find the drawings and actually make one. They're not going to stuck with them, have they? Yeah.
But yeah, if that cost ever comes down, and maybe it will, because maybe the next step is to have, you know, the kind of performance that is in the current mirrorless cameras in medium format cameras, and then they'll proliferate more, and then maybe housing prices and, you know, all that kind of stuff comes down. They'll have more lenses, all that kind of good jazz.
Yeah, and I imagine that the price is like that because they know that the demand for those systems is coming from, you know, say a professional advertising shoot where you know, the photographer is being commissioned because they're a medium format shooter and they're not an underwater shooter, and they're going to buy the housing for the project. And in the end, it's just, you know, it's in the costs column, and they don't really care how big those numbers are for that particular shoot. I think as a general underwater photographer, I don't feel medium format is the next frontier that we should all be going to. And that's because of the limitations that we've said. That said, I think if Fujifilm brought out a fisheye for the GFX 100, that would change a lot of things, because I think
Yeah.
that would be more forgiving behind the dome port than the rectilinears on full frame. And I think that could really open up some things, and imagine if they brought out a fisheye zoom, then you'd suddenly have an incredibly capable camera.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a no forever. I think there's also a lot more lenses being produced by third-party manufacturers. And, having shot mechanical fisheyes, which, non-autofocus fisheyes underwater, they're surprisingly easy to shoot. Things don't change distance that much when you're shooting a fisheye underwater. It's pretty easy to do your manual focus stuff. And so even a third-party manual focus fisheye for a medium format camera could become a really powerful lens. And they're not so difficult to design and make. Nauticam made, I think even before they made the WWL, they made their mechanical fisheye lens. Or certainly around the same time they made the WWL. So the very beginning of their optics journey and making a mechanical fisheye lens. And they made those for full frame cameras. They made a Sony one, a Nikon one, and a Canon one. And I've shot the Sony one, as you know. And it would be pretty easy for them to scale that up and make a dedicated mechanical fisheye for the Fuji. But the reason that mechanical fisheye never made it to market was the fact that the customer who's never shot a mechanical fisheye underwater feels that it would be too much of a drawback to use a manual focus, manual aperture setting lens underwater on a dive. And I can understand that. So people are like, I don't want that compromise. Now, actually, if you get one of those lenses and use it, you realize that actually when you shoot fisheye, you don't really change aperture that much. And actually, you don't change focus point that much. And it's not really that difficult to focus, and it stays the same one dive to the next. So it's a surprisingly easy thing to shoot. But until you've shot it, and it does depend what you're shooting, it feels like quite a big barrier. But that could be a way into medium format.
Well, one thing you just mentioned is about scaling up. And another thing to keep in mind is a lot of, especially Canon lenses, will cover the full medium format sensor. So like the Canon 100L macro, for example, there's an adapter, I think it's called Fringer or something like that, which allows full autofocus performance and aperture control and all that good stuff. And it covers the full sensor without vignetting. And obviously not every lens is going to be like that. Like you probably can't take the Sony 28-60 and toss it on a medium format and have it work properly. But there are certain lenses that will cover the sensor. So that might be another option to help use with wet lenses and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because, you expect to be able to use lenses on smaller formats, but not take them bigger, because it's like, why are they wasting time making the image circle bigger than they need?
But
so, that is really interesting. Really interesting. So I think our closing remarks are: medium format is a frontier on image quality, and it is also a way to give your pictures a very distinctive, very different look, which can be ideal for certain types of shoots, whether they're commercial or artistically driven. This gear might well be an important selling point for the shoot. But I'd say the lack of suitable lenses and the inherent problems related to shooting on a wider format, on a bigger format, are limitations a bit too far for the average underwater photographer. You are basically tying one hand behind your back a lot of the time by using these systems. And unless you are a very precise underwater photographer, potentially working with certain types of subjects that allow you to be so precise, I think a lot of times you won't realize the image quality advantages, and actually the extra resolution and detail and narrower depth of field may often expose flaws in your technique more than expose excellence in them. But if you are a very precise photographer and you know that, and you're looking for a way to mark your work out and maybe make it more interesting for those reasons we already mentioned, then it could be, I think, an avenue well worth exploring.
Yep. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. I won't put it any more eloquently than that. So thank you guys as always for watching, and please comments, concerns, questions, all that good stuff down in the comments below, and we will see you guys next time.